transfer portal is still buzzing. The window has closed, but there are still some names that are going to pop up in there within the next 48 hours. One of the big names that popped up or announced they were going to pop up in there as of, I think, 24 hours ago was Payton Woodyard. We mentioned him on yesterday's show. He is a 4-star safety from the class of 2024, early enrolled at Bama. Obviously, he committed to Nick Saban, wanted to go play DB for Nick Saban, spent the spring at Alabama, and received the Most Improved Freshman Award along with some of his other classmates in that category for Most Improved Freshman. He is now entering the portal. He's in the portal, and he is going to visit Oregon. Now, Steve Wiltfong and Pete Nakos, the authority sources on the transfer portal, have already put in picks for him to end up with the Ducks. This makes a lot of sense. Payton Woodyard, as we mentioned yesterday, he's from Southern California, so he's getting back closer to home if he ends up going to Oregon. And also, he can't transfer within the SEC because Payton Woodyard, during his recruitment, had committed to Georgia and then flipped to Alabama. He could commit to Georgia or another SEC school, but he'd have to sit out a whole season. So if he goes to Oregon, he plays early, he plays under a defensive head coach in Dan Lanning and a great defensive coordinator in Tosh Lupoi, would make a lot of sense as well geographically, as we already mentioned. So Payton Woodyard taking a visit to Oregon, I would expect a commitment out of there if I'm tracking those picks from Pete Nakos and Steve Wiltfong. Derek Harmon, we mention him a lot on this show, especially during this segment, because he is one of the most sought-after players in the transfer portal. He's a proven commodity. He's played college football at a high level. You're not taking a gamble. You bring him onto your team. He's from Michigan State, as we've mentioned, 6'5", 320 pounds with real proven production. USC and Colorado are kind of those two schools that are battling back and forth for him. He was going to visit Miami. He's since canceled that visit after his Colorado visit. So if we're reading the tea leaves, that probably bodes well for Colorado. Important to note here, he was in the transfer portal during the winter window. Withdrew, went back to Michigan State. During that winter window, he visited Oregon. Now, Pete Nakos tweeted it out this morning, hey, keep an eye on Oregon. Keep an eye on the Ducks now. Just because he didn't visit most recently doesn't mean they're not still in the mix. He actually said the opposite of that. They are very much so in the mix. If he goes to USC or Colorado, Derek Harmon, to me, is like a tide-changing kind of player because both those schools are trying to get better and more physical on the defensive line. You go to USC and pair him with Bear Alexander, maybe you're in a better position moving into the Big Ten. If he goes to Colorado, he's going to be, I think, right away the best defensive lineman on that roster and will do a phenomenal job, obviously, trying to bolster the middle of that defense. If he goes to Oregon, to me, he feels a lot more like that missing piece. Like Oregon, let's call a spade here. They're thinking national championship this year. That is their aspirations. I understand it's a new quarterback. I understand they got some new pieces. They are thinking national championship this year. They're thinking Big Ten conference championship this year. Okay, so you add in a guy like a Derek Harmon to go along with Mateo Uiagalelei, who's coming off the edge, Jordan Birch, who's coming off the edge. Feel really good about what you have up front. You got to have it up front in the Big Ten, man. There's no guessing about that. You got to have it, and Derek Harmon would obviously help Oregon have that should he end up committing to the Ducks. Speaking of the Big Ten, man, Washington landed a commitment from Jaden Wayne. 6'6", 245-pound edge transferring from Miami. He's a top 85 recruit when he came out of high school. This is big for Washington. As I just mentioned, you're moving into a line of scrimmage league. Got to have the players on the line of scrimmage. Jaden Wayne, it didn't work out for him at Miami. Doesn't mean he's not still super talented. Doesn't mean he doesn't make Washington immediately a better football team by being on that roster. So we'll track his progress. This is someone that we originally on this show, I think we even just sort of blindly assumed he would end up back on the West Coast. He's from Washington. He's going to the home state school with the Huskies. Good for Jaden Wayne. Ohio State wide receiver Keon Grayes is entering the transfer portal. 4-star wide receiver from the class of 2022. And I always kind of take it with a grain of salt anytime I see a high-profile recruit hitting the portal from a high-profile school, even more specifically from a high-profile position room at that school. Like, I say the same thing about Alabama in that secondary room. Just because you weren't a starter at Alabama and you were a 4-star out of high school doesn't mean you can't still be really good and help somebody else in college football. Because what do you know about that wide receiver room at Ohio State? It's stacked with first-round players year in and year out. Okay, so Keon Grayes, make no mistake about it, that's a good football player. That 4-star billing he had coming out of high school, that's not just like something missed or something that someone missed on, rather, with Keon Grayes. So he's from the state of Arizona. Wouldn't shock me if some West Coast schools were in play here for him, just guessing. We'll keep an eye on that. That's a good player in the transfer portal. Alabama defensive back, right on cue for our comparison there. Tony Mitchell, 6'2", 205-pound defensive back, 4-star in the class of 23. He's got 3 years left of eligibility. Interesting to note here, a lot of schools for him when it came to his recruitment at the high school level were all from the SEC. So common knowledge, whenever a kid jumps in the portal, you say, okay, well, who were the other hats on the table? It was schools like the Auburns of the world, the Texas A&Ms, the Floridas, like schools like that were in the running for him. If he were to transfer to another school within the SEC, he would have to sit out a year. Now, he's got 3 years to burn, so if he wanted to do that, he very much so could, but just something to think about here as we're tracking the recruitment of a one Tony Mitchell. Kendrick Blackshire, linebacker at Texas, previously at Alabama, is entering the transfer portal. This is a guy who transferred from Bama to Texas during that winter window after playing 25 games at Alabama. He is now back in the transfer portal. This is a guy that's from the state of Texas. Same thing as we said with Tony Mitchell is true about Kendrick Blackshire. He cannot transfer to an SEC school and be immediately eligible because he's not a graduate transfer. 6'2". Texas had him listed at 261 on the roster. That's a big boy. I'm curious where they would put him on the defense if he stays playing linebacker. Do you move him to edge? I mean, I don't know where Kendrick Blackshire fits in the defense, but have to believe he's going to be highly sought after, especially given the fact that he's playing a premium position like linebacker right now and given the demand and supply that's available right now in the transfer portal. So Kendrick Blackshire is back on the market after transferring from that winter cycle over to Texas from Bama. Louisville running back Penny Boone. We talked about this yesterday with Pete Nakos. That's a player that also transferred during the winter cycle, was Offensive Player of the Year in the MAC. I mean, just ran it up on Wednesday nights, had over 1,400 yards last season. He transferred from Toledo to Louisville. He's back in the transfer portal. There was some thought that maybe he'd go back to Louisville. Georgia was an option at one point, it looked like. Kentucky looked like they could be an option for him. Pete Nakos has put in a pick for UCF. Now, if he goes to UCF, he's not the lone back. I believe it's R.J. Harvey is also a running back for UCF right now that could help carry the load. So it's not just like you're the only bell cow, which I think with his NFL aspirations could be attractive. And then also with that offense with KJ Jefferson, being able to be dynamic on those zone reads and things like that, also taking pressure off the running back, could be a good fit. So Louisville running back Penny Boone has been projected and picked to UCF. We'll keep an eye on that one, but I think that'd be a huge get for the Knights. Top offensive lineman in the transfer portal right now is Jason Zandamela. He transferred from USC. He was at USC, committed out of high school. He was a 4-star player in the class of 2024. He has made it very clear he wants to go back to where he's from, which is, of course, the state of Florida. UCF and Florida right now are the two schools to beat. If UCF lands Jason Zandamela over the home state Gators, I shouldn't say the home state, they're both home state schools, but over the SEC school in the state, the Gators, that is a flag-planting moment for Gus Malzahn. That is, I think, a major recruiting win for them and should also bolster their efforts going forward in terms of talent acquisition. But if Florida's able to land him, that'd be major in the way that it helps them in the interior of that offensive line, trying to run the football in the future. And then at the very worst, you just provide some more depth and you're able to have another body in there that's going to help you over the course of the season. So that's kind of the latest from the portal. Keep an eye on the socials, man. There's a lot going on. Make sure you subscribe to all the On3 accounts. Pete Nakos, Steve Wiltfong, On3 Transfer Portal, On3 Main, like all those things. Stay dialed in. I know the window has closed. That does not mean that the action is over. We're going to cover it all the way through the line here as we do on this show. So also make sure you're subscribed here. We appreciate you in advance for doing that. Hey, y'all. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.